Luke Carter had always preferred the isolation of the frontier worlds. Far from the chaos of bustling cities and endless galactic wars, his small farm on the edge of Zandara, a remote and mostly desolate planet, offered him the peace he desperately sought after years of service in the military. Here, the skies were vast and quiet, and the twin moons cast a soft glow over the barren landscape. It was a place where no one bothered him, and that's how he liked it. But tonight, something felt different. The wind carried with it a strange sound, a faint cry, almost human but tinged with desperation. Luke stood on his porch, scanning the horizon. The dusty plains of Zandara stretched out before him, empty as always, or so he thought. Then, in the distance, he saw movement. A figure stumbled toward his farm, small and weak, barely able to stand. His instincts kicked in. Whoever it was, they didn't look like a threat, but on a planet like Zandara, you could never be too careful. Grabbing his plasma rifle, Luke moved cautiously toward the figure. As he got closer, he could make out the unmistakable features of an alien woman. She was slender, her skin a pale shade of blue that shimmered in the moonlight. Her large, dark eyes were wide with exhaustion, and her long, silver hair clung to her face, matted with dust. She wore a torn robe, the fabric barely holding together, as if she had been running for days. "Help me," she gasped, collapsing onto the dry earth just a few feet from Luke. Luke knelt beside her, his rifle lowered but still in his grip. "Who are you? What are you doing out here?" Her breath came in ragged gasps as she tried to speak. "My name is Zara. I'm from the Zandaran tribe. Please, I have no one. They took everything." Luke's brow furrowed. He had heard of the Zandarin, the native inhabitants of Zandara, but they were rarely seen near human settlements. Most kept to their own in the remote mountains or deserts, far from the colonists who had claimed much of their land. "Who took everything?" Luke asked, his voice gruff but curious. "Slavers," Zara whispered, her voice breaking. "They raided our village. My family, my people, they're all gone. I managed to escape, but they'll find me soon. I beg you, take me in. I'll work. I'll do anything, just don't send me away." Luke's heart clenched at the desperation in her voice. He had seen the horrors of slavers in the galaxy, and the thought of this fragile woman falling into their hands made his stomach churn. But he was no stranger to caution. Life on the frontier required it. "You don't have to be a servant," he said after a long pause. "You can stay here. I won't let them take you." Zara's eyes widened in disbelief, her lips trembling. "You'll protect me?" "I'll do what I can," Luke replied, helping her to her feet. "Come inside." As he led her toward his small cabin, Luke couldn't shake the feeling that he had just made a decision that would change his life forever. What he didn't realize was that Zara's arrival was only the beginning of something far greater than either of them could have imagined. The cabin was small but cozy, filled with the scent of aged wood and the faint aroma of herbs drying in the corner. Luke gestured for Zara to sit at the rough-hewn table while he rummaged through a cabinet for some water. He could still hear the echoes of her terrified voice in his mind. Slavers. A word that sent shivers down his spine. He had thought the galaxy was finally free of such brutality, but here it was, rearing its ugly head once more. "Here," he said, handing her a wooden cup filled with cool water. Zara took it with trembling hands, her eyes wide and fearful. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice hoarse. She took a sip, her gaze darting around the room, taking in her surroundings as if searching for an escape route. Luke sat down across from her, his expression serious. "I need to know more about what happened. Where are the slavers based? How many of them are there?" Zara's face paled at his questions. "I don't know how many. They came in ships of advanced ones. They attacked our village at dusk, catching everyone off guard. They didn't just take us. They killed those who resisted. I barely escaped by hiding in the woods." Luke clenched his jaw, picturing the chaos she described. "You're safe here for now, but we need to make a plan. The slavers won't stop searching for you. They're ruthless. I can't let them find me," Zara replied, her voice rising slightly. "They will do terrible things. My people, they're not just going to give up. We must fight back." Luke raised an eyebrow. "Fight back? You're talking about going against armed slavers with superior technology. I know the terrain." she insisted, her eyes sparking with determination. I know how to move through the mountains undetected. I can help you set traps, ambush them when they come for me. For the first time, Luke considered the strength of the alliance they could forge. She had knowledge he didn't, an advantage they could use. Okay, he said slowly. But we need to be smart about this. We can't take unnecessary risks. Zara nodded, her resolve solidifying. What do you suggest? First, we need to gather supplies. If we're going to fight, we'll need weapons, food, and gear to survive in the wild. My rifle will only take us so far. As they began to strategize, the weight of the situation pressed heavily upon Luke's shoulders. He was no longer just a solitary farmer. He was now part of something larger. A reluctant protector. He didn't want to admit it, but a flicker of hope ignited in him. Perhaps this was the purpose he had been searching for, a chance to make a difference. Let's start by checking the old cache in the hills, he said, determination setting in. It's a few miles from here, but it should have enough supplies to get us started. Zara's face lit up. I can lead the way. I know the safest paths. All right, Luke said, a newfound sense of camaraderie forming between them. We'll leave at first light. For now, get some rest. You'll need your strength. As she prepared to sleep, Luke stepped outside for a moment, the cool night air filling his lungs. The stars shimmered above him, a vast expanse of possibilities. He realized that by bringing Zara into his life, he had also invited chaos, but perhaps chaos was just what he needed to escape the emptiness that had consumed him for so long. The first light of dawn crept into the cabin, casting soft shadows against the wooden walls. Luke stirred, the quiet stillness of the morning lulling him into a sense of calm. He glanced over at Zara, who lay curled up on the makeshift bed, her face peaceful in sleep. The sight stirred a protective instinct within him. He couldn't let anything happen to her. Time to get moving, he whispered, nudging her shoulder gently. Zara blinked awake, the memories of the night flooding back. She shot up, her eyes wide with determination. What's the plan? Luke poured 2 cups of water from the pitcher, handing one to her. We'll head to the cache in the hills first. It's a good distance from here, and I want to make sure we stay off the main paths. Zara nodded, drinking deeply before setting the cup down. Lead the way. They stepped outside, the morning air crisp against their skin. The landscape unfolded around them, a blend of rugged terrain and vibrant greenery, and Luke felt a sense of familiarity wash over him. Despite the dire circumstances, the mountains had always been a source of solace. As they walked, Zara pointed out various plants and signs of wildlife. Those berries are edible, and that path is less traveled. If we stay alert, we should avoid any trouble. Luke admired her knowledge and confidence. You know these mountains well. It's impressive. I had to learn, she said, a hint of sadness creeping into her voice. Survival depends on knowing your land. They hiked in silence, the rhythmic crunch of gravel beneath their boots punctuating the stillness. As they approached a steep incline, Luke paused, scanning the horizon. We should take a break before we tackle the ascent. Good idea, Zara agreed, leaning against a boulder. What's in the cache? Food? Weapons. Medical supplies, Luke replied, pulling out a small map he had sketched. I've hidden things in various spots over the years, but this one is the most stocked. Zara leaned closer, studying the map. If we can get there and back without being detected, we'll have a solid chance to prepare for the slavers. Exactly, Luke said, a renewed sense of purpose fueling his words. Once we have the supplies, we can start planning our next move. They resumed their hike, tackling the incline together. As they climbed, Luke felt the weight of their mission pressing down on him. It was one thing to gather supplies. It was another to confront a band of ruthless slavers. He stole a glance at Zara, who was breathing steadily, determination etched into her features. Suddenly, a rustle in the bushes sent both of them into a defensive stance. Luke's hand instinctively went to the knife strapped to his thigh. Did you hear that? He whispered. Zara nodded, her eyes sharp. We should move quietly. It could be an animal or something else. They edged closer to the sound, hearts racing in unison. Luke felt the tension build as he prepared for whatever might emerge. As they rounded the bushes, they were met with the sight of a deer. Startled by their presence, it bolted into the trees, and Luke let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Just a deer," Zara said, a nervous laugh escaping her lips. "But we can't let our guard down. They'll be looking for me." As they continued, the terrain grew steeper, and the path narrowed. Luke's thoughts wandered to the slavers and their likely motives. Why had they returned? The galaxy was supposed to be free of such horrors. His heart ached at the thought of Zara being captured, and the determination to protect her hardened within him.
After what felt like hours,
They finally reached the cache, hidden behind a cluster of rocks. Luke pushed aside the stones to reveal a small wooden chest, its edges worn from time. "Here it is," he said, lifting the lid to reveal an array of supplies. Canned food, water bottles, and a couple of weapons were neatly packed inside. Zara's eyes widened with excitement as she rummaged through the cache. "This is perfect. With these supplies, we can set traps and gather more intel about the slavers." Luke smiled, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. "Exactly. Now we just need to be smart about our next steps." As they packed the supplies into their bags, Luke couldn't shake the feeling that their alliance was no longer just a means of survival. They were becoming a team, united by a shared goal. For the first time in a long time, he felt a flicker of hope for a future beyond mere existence. "Let's head back," he said, securing the chest. "We've got work to do." As they descended, the mountains loomed around them, their majesty a reminder of the challenges ahead. Luke stole a glance at Zara, who walked beside him with a determined stride. They were two unlikely allies, bound by circumstance, yet forged by a shared strength that would carry them through the darkness to come. The sun hung high in the sky as Luke and Zara made their way back through the woods, their bags filled with supplies and a renewed sense of purpose. The trees cast long shadows on the forest floor, but the warmth of the day provided a reassuring comfort. Luke couldn't shake the feeling of impending danger, his instincts alerting him that they were not alone. "Keep an eye out for any signs of movement," he advised, his voice low. Zara nodded, her expression serious. "I'll scan the treetops. If anyone's following us, they might be using the higher ground." They pressed on, every rustle in the underbrush raising the tension between them. Luke's thoughts raced. What if the slavers had already begun their hunt? The realization sent a chill down his spine, but he pushed it aside. Focus on the task at hand. As they neared the edge of the forest, a distant sound made them halt. The low rumble of engines reverberated through the air. Luke exchanged a glance with Zara, both of them immediately recognizing the source. The slavers. "We need to find cover," Luke whispered urgently, scanning their surroundings. "They're close." Zara pointed to a thick grove of trees. "Over there." They dashed toward the grove, ducking behind the dense foliage just as a convoy of vehicles trundled down the dirt path, their engines roaring like thunder. Luke's heart raced as he caught a glimpse of the slavers in their rugged attire, their faces obscured by dark helmets. "They look more organized than before," Zara muttered, her eyes wide with concern. "They've likely expanded their operations," Luke replied, keeping his voice barely above a whisper. "We need to stay out of sight until they pass." They crouched low, their breaths held as the convoy rolled by. Luke counted 3 vehicles, each packed with armed men and supplies. He noticed one vehicle in particular, a modified truck with reinforced sides, seemed to carry more than just weapons. He felt a surge of anger. What are they planning? As the convoy disappeared into the distance, Luke felt a mix of relief and anxiety. "We need to move before they double back. There's a chance they'll set up camp nearby." Zara nodded, her face pale but resolute. "Let's head to the cave. It's off the main trails and should provide some shelter." They quickly made their way toward the cave, a hidden spot Luke had discovered during his time in the mountains. The path wound steeply upward, and they climbed with urgency. When they finally reached the entrance, Luke peered inside to ensure it was empty. "Looks clear," he said, stepping inside. The cave was cool and dark, with just enough space for them to hide. Zara followed closely behind, her expression focused. "We should stay here for a while and gather our thoughts. Maybe we can devise a plan to deal with the slavers." As they settled in, Luke leaned against the rough stone wall, contemplating their options. We could try to disrupt their operations, create diversions or sabotage their vehicles, but we need to know their routines first, Zara countered, her brow furrowed. If we go in blind, we risk getting caught. Luke nodded, appreciating her pragmatism. You're right. We need information. Let's stake out their camp once they set up. Hours passed, and the cave remained silent except for the soft sounds of their breathing. As dusk fell, the world outside transformed, the sun dipping behind the mountains, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Do you think they'll set up camp tonight? Zara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Most likely. They'll want to rest before moving again. That gives us time to plan, Luke replied, feeling the weight of responsibility settle heavily on his shoulders. Suddenly, a distant sound shattered the silence, voices rising and falling, punctuated by laughter. Luke's heart raced. They're here, peering out of the cave entrance. He spotted the convoy returning, the headlights of their vehicles illuminating the night. He and Zara slipped back into the shadows, straining to hear the conversation. I can't believe we lost her in those woods, one slaver grumbled. She's a slippery one. She won't get far, another replied, his voice dripping with menace. We'll set up camp here, and I guarantee we'll find her by morning. Luke clenched his fists, anger coursing through him. They were talking about Zara. They had no idea how determined she was. Let's secure the perimeter, a third voice said. No one gets in or out without us knowing. As the slavers moved closer, Luke turned to Zara, her face pale but fierce. We have to act. We can't let them take you, Zara nodded, her resolve steeling. We'll use the cover of night. If we create a distraction, we can slip past them. Luke thought for a moment, formulating a plan. I can set off a few rocks to create noise on the opposite side of the camp. When they go to check it out, we'll make our move. Zara's eyes sparkled with determination. Let's do it. They waited for the slavers to settle in, their laughter fading into the night. When the campfire dimmed and the shadows deepened, Luke carefully moved toward the edge of the cave, gathering small rocks and twigs. With a practiced hand, he hurled a rock into the brush across the camp. It landed with a loud thud, echoing through the trees. Hey! What was that? One of the slavers shouted, rising to his feet. Check it out, another ordered, urgency in his tone. It could be her. As the men scattered toward the noise, Luke and Zara exchanged quick glances. This was their moment. They slipped out of the cave, hearts pounding, adrenaline surging as they moved toward the open ground. In the shadows, they dashed past the campfire, staying low and silent. The darkness enveloped them, a protective cloak as they made their way back toward the woods. Keep moving, Luke urged, sensing the urgency of their situation. They navigated through the trees, their breath coming in quick gasps. Finally, as the sounds of the slavers faded into the distance, Luke stopped to catch his breath. We did it, Zara gasped, a smile breaking through her tension. We actually got away. For now, Luke said, scanning the darkness for any signs of pursuit. But we need to keep moving. We can't let them find us again. As they pressed on, a sense of camaraderie blossomed between them. They were no longer just two people fighting for survival. They were allies with a shared goal. And as the mountains loomed around them, Luke felt the weight of hope beginning to rise within him, a belief that they could overcome whatever came next. The moon cast a silvery glow over the dense forest as Luke and Zara navigated through the underbrush, their hearts pounding in rhythm with the sound of their footsteps. Every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig sent jolts of adrenaline coursing through them. They had escaped the slavers' camp for now, but the danger was far from over. We need to find a higher ground, Luke suggested, glancing up at the mountains looming in the distance. If we can get to the ridge, we might spot their camp and plan our next move. Agreed, Zara replied, her determination unwavering despite the fatigue evident in her voice. But we need to be cautious. They'll be searching for us. They climbed steadily upward, the terrain growing steeper and the air thinner. Luke took the lead, keeping an eye on their surroundings for any signs of movement. He could feel the weight of the previous day's events pressing down on him, but the thought of Zara's safety fueled his resolve. As they reached a clearing, they paused to catch their breath. The view from the ridge was breathtaking, the moonlight illuminating the valley below. But the sight brought no comfort. The slavers' camp was visible in the distance, its flickering lights a stark reminder of the danger lurking nearby. "There they are," Luke whispered, pointing toward the camp. "Looks like they're still getting organized. We should take advantage of this." Zara squinted into the darkness. "What do you see?" Luke focused on the movement below. "They've set up a perimeter, but I can see a couple of vehicles parked on the outskirts. If we can get to one of those, we might be able to create a diversion." Zara nodded, her eyes gleaming with excitement. "Let's move before they realize we're gone." Carefully, they made their way down the ridge, sticking to the shadows as they approached the camp. The sounds of laughter and clinking metal drifted through the air, mingling with the crackling of the campfire. Luke's heart raced. They were so close, yet so vulnerable. Once they reached the edge of the camp, they crouched behind a cluster of bushes. "We need a distraction," Luke murmured, scanning the area for any potential tools they could use. "Over there!" Zara pointed to a stack of wooden crates near the vehicles. "If we can knock those over, it'll create enough noise to draw their attention." Luke considered it for a moment. "Okay, but we'll have to act fast." With a nod, they carefully moved closer, their feet silent against the ground. Luke steadied himself, heart pounding, and then he pushed one of the crates with all his strength. It toppled over, the sound echoing loudly through the camp. "What was that?" A voice shouted from the campfire, followed by the sound of scrambling feet. Now was their chance. Luke and Zara dashed toward the nearest vehicle, a rugged pickup with the keys still in the ignition. Luke's hands trembled as he fumbled with the door, throwing it open and hopping inside. Zara slid into the passenger seat, her eyes wide with adrenaline. "Start it up," Luke urged, glancing back toward the camp as the slavers rushed to investigate the noise. Zara turned the key, and the engine roared to life. "Let's go," she shouted, her voice filled with urgency. Luke shifted the vehicle into gear, slamming on the gas. The truck lurched forward, and they barreled through the camp, sending crates and equipment flying in their wake. The sounds of chaos erupted behind them as the slavers realized what was happening. "Go! Go!" Luke shouted, adrenaline fueling their escape as he swerved around obstacles, heart racing with every bump in the road. Zara clutched the dashboard, her knuckles white. "This way," she directed, pointing toward a narrow path leading deeper into the woods. Luke followed her lead, turning sharply onto the path, the trees closing in around them. The truck jolted violently, but he managed to keep it steady as they sped away from the chaos of the camp. Behind them, they could hear the distant shouts of the slavers, the roar of their vehicles starting up in pursuit. Luke's heart sank at the realization. "They'll be right on our tails." "What do we do?" Zara asked, her voice a mixture of fear and determination. "We need to find a place to hide," Luke replied, scanning the area for any potential cover. "There's a creek up ahead. If we can make it there, we might be able to lose them in the underbrush." Zara nodded, determination burning in her eyes. "Let's go." They raced toward the creek, the sound of rushing water growing louder as they neared. Luke swerved the truck off the path, guiding it to a hidden clearing just off the creek's bank. He cut the engine, and they both jumped out, heartbeats echoing in their ears. "Quick, we need to get low," Luke urged, leading Zara behind a cluster of large rocks near the water's edge. They crouched down, adrenaline surging as they listened for the sounds of their pursuers. "Do you think they saw us?" Zara whispered, her eyes darting nervously toward the road. "I don't know," Luke replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "But we need to stay quiet." They waited in silence, the tension palpable. Moments stretched into what felt like hours as they held their breath, listening intently. Finally, the sound of revving engines echoed through the trees, and Luke's heart raced. "Here they come," he whispered, peering around the rock to catch a glimpse of the approaching slavers. Two vehicles roared into view, their headlights cutting through the darkness like searchlights. "They'll see us," Zara whispered, panic rising in her voice. "Just stay still," Luke instructed, watching as the vehicles slowed, their drivers scanning the area for any signs of movement. The slavers exited their trucks, weapons drawn and ready. Luke felt the weight of fear settle in his stomach as they fanned out, searching the woods with ruthless determination. "Split up. Check the creek," one of the slavers ordered, his voice commanding. Luke turned to Zara, desperation in his eyes. "We need to move. Now." As the slavers approached the creek, Luke grabbed Zara's hand. "Follow me." They darted silently into the underbrush, slipping through the trees, moving farther away from the creek. Every crunch of leaves beneath their feet made Luke wince, but they pressed on, hearts pounding. "Where do we go?" Zara asked, breathless as they continued their escape. "There's an old cabin not far from here," Luke said, recalling the location from his time exploring the mountains. "It should provide some cover. Let's hope we can make it there before they find us," Zara replied, determination flickering in her eyes. They ran through the woods, dodging branches and rocks, the fear of capture driving them forward. As they neared the cabin, Luke spotted its silhouette against the moonlit sky, a glimmer of hope in the darkness. "Almost there," he urged, pushing himself harder. They reached the cabin, breathless and trembling. Luke swung the door open, revealing a dusty interior filled with remnants of a forgotten life. He quickly closed the door behind them, sealing themselves in the shadows. "Do you think they'll find us?" Zara asked, her voice a shaky whisper. "Not if we're quiet," Luke replied, scanning the cabin for any potential hiding spots. "Let's stay low and listen." They found a corner behind a crumbling old couch and settled in, their breaths mingling with the dust in the air. Time passed slowly, each second stretching into eternity as they listened for any signs of the slavers. The sounds of the woods surrounded them, owls hooting, leaves rustling, and the distant babble of the creek, but there were no signs of pursuit. "I can't believe we escaped," Zara breathed, leaning her head against the wall, exhaustion washing over her. Luke looked at her, pride swelling in his chest. "We did it together, and we'll keep fighting." The night wore on, and as the hours ticked by, Luke felt a sense of calm settling in. They were safe, for the moment, and together they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. "We'll figure this out," he said softly, glancing at Zara. "We'll find a way to stop the slavers for good." She met his gaze, determination flickering in her eyes. Together, as they sat in the darkness, the bond between them strengthened, fueled by the fire of shared purpose. The night may have been filled with danger, but it was also filled with hope, a hope that together, they could take back their lives. The dawn broke slowly, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink, signaling a new day. Luke and Zara remained hidden in the cabin, their bodies weary from the previous night's escape, but their minds racing with thoughts of what lay ahead. "Do you think they've given up?" Zara asked, her voice a soft whisper as she peered through a crack in the wooden wall. "I doubt it," Luke replied, rubbing the back of his neck. "They'll be searching for us, but we can't stay here forever. We need a plan." Zara turned to him, determination in her eyes. "What do you have in mind?" Luke paced the small cabin, running through their options. "We need to find more people who are willing to fight back. The slavers can't be allowed to keep doing this. If we can rally others, we might stand a chance." Zara nodded, her confidence bolstered by Luke's conviction. "But how do we find them? The slavers control everything out here. There are always whispers of resistance," Luke said, his mind racing. "We'll need to head toward the town nearby. There are bound to be people who have heard something or who have had their own encounters with the slavers." "The town?" Zara's eyes widened. "Isn't that dangerous? What if we run into them?" Luke took a deep breath, steeling himself for the uncertainty ahead. "It's a risk we have to take. We need information, and we need allies. If we just hide here, we're only prolonging the inevitable." Zara considered his words, her resolve strengthening. "All right, but we'll need to be careful. We should leave just before dusk to avoid being spotted." "Good idea," Luke agreed. "In the meantime, let's gather supplies while we can. We'll need food, water, and anything else we can use." The two spent the next few hours rummaging through the cabin and its surroundings, scavenging what they could find. They discovered an old backpack tucked away in a corner, which they filled with canned food, a few bottles of water, and a small first aid kit. "Not much, but it will do for now," Zara said, checking their haul. "We should also look for a map. It would help us navigate to the town more easily. As they searched the cabin, Luke found a dusty old drawer, its wood creaking as he opened it. Inside lay a faded map of the area, complete with notes and markings that suggested possible safe routes through the woods. "This could be perfect," he exclaimed, carefully unfolding it. "Look here, there's a trail that leads directly to the town. It looks like it's less traveled, which should help us avoid detection." Zara leaned over his shoulder, her eyes scanning the map. "We can take this route, and if we're careful, we should be able to reach the town before nightfall." They spent the remainder of the day preparing, taking turns keeping watch by the windows and discussing their plan in hushed tones. The weight of the impending journey hung heavily over them, but each moment spent together deepened their bond. As dusk began to settle, they packed their supplies and steeled themselves for the challenges ahead. The woods were alive with the sounds of nocturnal creatures, a reminder of the danger lurking just outside their temporary refuge. "Are you ready?" Luke asked, glancing at Zara as they stood at the cabin's door. She took a deep breath, her determination shining through. "Let's do this." They stepped out into the cool evening air, the path ahead cloaked in shadows. The forest seemed to hold its breath, and they moved cautiously, hearts pounding as they navigated through the underbrush. As they followed the trail, they remained vigilant, listening for any sounds of pursuit. The tension was palpable, but Luke felt a surge of hope. They were no longer just running. They were on a mission. After what felt like hours of careful navigation, they emerged from the woods onto the outskirts of the town. The glow of streetlights flickered ahead, casting eerie shadows on the empty streets. "There it is," Luke whispered, scanning the area for any signs of danger. "We need to find a safe place to observe." They ducked behind an abandoned building, watching the town come alive as the night deepened. Small groups of people moved about, but the atmosphere was tense, as if everyone was aware of the lurking threat posed by the slavers. "Do you see anyone who looks like they might know about the resistance?" Zara asked, her eyes scanning the crowd. Luke's gaze fell upon a group of 3 men gathered around a flickering lamp, speaking in hushed tones. "Those guys look like they're up to something," he replied. "We should approach them carefully." They crept closer, keeping to the shadows. As they drew near, they caught snippets of conversation. "I heard they're cracking down on anyone who speaks out against them," one man said, his voice low. "We need to be careful." Luke exchanged a glance with Zara, their hearts racing at the realization. These men were discussing the very issues they wanted to address. "Let's get closer," Luke urged, and they positioned themselves within earshot. Suddenly, a loud shout erupted from down the street. "Hey, you there!" The men turned, panic flashing across their faces as a group of slavers emerged from an alley, their eyes scanning the area. The tension in the air thickened, and Luke knew they had to act fast. "Now," he whispered to Zara, grabbing her hand as they dashed forward. They slipped past the group and ducked into an alley, narrowly avoiding detection. Their hearts raced as they pressed against the cool brick wall, listening to the chaos unfolding behind them. "We can't just hide," Zara panted, her eyes wide with urgency. "We need to help them." Luke hesitated, torn between the need for caution and the urge to fight back. "If we engage now, we risk drawing attention to ourselves. But what if they get captured?" Zara argued, her voice filled with desperation. "They might be our only chance to find allies." Luke could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He glanced down the alley, where shadows danced ominously. Finally, he made his choice. "All right, but we stick together. No heroics." With a determined nod, they crept out of the alley, moving toward the fray. As they rounded the corner, they saw the slavers closing in on the men, who were trying to defend themselves. "Hey, over here!" Luke shouted, drawing the attention of the slavers. "What are you doing?" Zara hissed, panic in her eyes. "Distracting them," he called back. "We can't let them get caught." The slavers turned, surprise flashing across their faces. "Who the hell are you?" Luke's heart raced as he stood his ground. "We're not going to let you take anyone else." The men turned, seeing their unexpected allies, and their eyes widened with hope. "You're crazy," one of them yelled, but determination flickered in his expression. Before the slavers could react, Luke charged forward, adrenaline pumping through his veins. He lunged at the nearest slaver, taking him by surprise and tackling him to the ground. Zara followed suit, grabbing a discarded piece of metal and swinging it at another slaver who was advancing toward them. "Fight back," Luke shouted, rallying the men as chaos erupted around them. The alley was filled with shouts and the sounds of struggle. Luke's instincts kicked in, and he fought with everything he had, each movement fueled by the desperation to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. As the fight intensified, more townspeople emerged from the shadows, drawn by the commotion. They joined the fray, emboldened by the sight of resistance. "Together!" Zara yelled, rallying the group as they pressed against the slavers, driving them back. Luke fought alongside Zara, adrenaline coursing through his veins as they pushed the slavers away from their newfound allies. "Keep going," he urged, his voice filled with conviction. With one final push, they forced the remaining slavers to retreat, their surprised expressions turning to fury as they scrambled to escape. The townspeople cheered, their spirits lifted by the unexpected victory. "Who are you?" one of the men asked, breathless from the fight. "I'm Luke, and this is Zara," he replied, a smile breaking across his face despite the chaos. "We're here to help." The men exchanged glances, realization dawning upon them. "You're the ones they've been searching for, the ones who escaped from the camp." Luke nodded, understanding the weight of their reputation. "We need to keep fighting. We can't let them keep terrorizing our people." With newfound determination, they gathered in a huddle, strategizing their next move. "There's a safe house not far from here," one of the men said. "If we can get there, we can regroup and plan how to take down the slavers for good." "Lead the way," Luke said, his heart racing with a mix of excitement and fear. As they moved through the town, the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a sense of purpose. They were no longer alone in their fight. They had allies, and together they could make a difference. But just as they reached the safe house, a chilling realization washed over Luke. "What if the slavers come back?" he asked, anxiety creeping into his voice. "We'll be ready," Zara said, her grip on his shoulder reassuring. "We've faced them once. We can do it again." Luke nodded, determination reigniting within him. "We will make a stand." As they entered the safe house, Luke glanced back at the darkened streets, his mind racing with thoughts of the future. The fight against the slavers had only just begun, and the battle ahead would be tougher than any they had faced before. But deep down, Luke felt a flicker of hope. Together, they would rise against the darkness, and perhaps, just perhaps, they could change the fate of their world. As the group settled in, making plans and sharing stories, a loud crash echoed from outside. The door burst open, and a figure stumbled inside, wide-eyed and breathless. "They're coming. We need to move now." Luke's heart raced as he turned to Zara, knowing that the fight for their freedom was far from over. "Ready?" she asked, her eyes gleaming with resolve. "Always," he replied, gripping her hand tightly. Together, they faced the unknown, ready to fight for their lives, their freedom, and the hope of a better tomorrow.